Hey, my name's Mark. I'm 29, and I've been living in this quiet little town on the outskirts of Eugene, Oregon for about 5 years now. It's one of those places where everyone knows your name at the local hardware store, but nobody pries too much into your business. I work as an appliance repair technician at a small shop downtown, fixing washers, dryers, fridges, that sort of thing. It's steady work, pays the bills, and I like it because it's straightforward. You diagnose the problem, get your hands dirty, and make it right. No drama, no complications. My house is a modest one-story with a wraparound porch painted gray with white trim. I bought it cheap after saving up from odd jobs, and it's just me here. No roommates, no pets, no family, dropping by unannounced. Mornings start the same. I brew a pot of black coffee, water the yellow chrysanthemums I planted out front last spring, and head to the shop. Afternoons are filled with service calls, crawling under sinks or hauling parts around. Evenings, I unwind with a book or some old vinyl records on the turntable. I don't go out much. Parties aren't my scene, and I've never been one for dating apps or blind setups. Life's simple, predictable, and that's how I like it. Across the street lives Julia Evans. She's 33, works as an office administrator for a local insurance firm, and she's one of the few neighbors I actually talk to. Our houses face each other, mine with its tidy lawn, hers with a small garden bed full of lavender and roses that she tends to meticulously. Julia's the kind of person everyone likes. Polite, always waves hello, brings cookies to the block party every summer. But over the years, through little interactions, I've noticed things about her that others might miss. Like how her smile never quite reaches her eyes, or how she sometimes stands on her porch at dusk, staring off into nothing, looking lost. We got to know each other gradually. It started a couple years back when her garbage disposal jammed, and she knocked on my door asking if I knew a good plumber. I offered to take a look, professional habit, and fixed it in 10 minutes. After that, it became a pattern. She'd call me over for a flickering light fixture or a squeaky door hinge, and I'd swing by with my toolbox. In return, she'd insist on making me coffee or handing me a slice of pie she'd baked. Our conversations were light at first, weather, town gossip, the best place for takeout. But over time, they deepened a bit. She'd mention books she was reading, or I'd talk about a tough job at work. I could tell she was carrying something heavy, though she never let on. Her eyes would cloud over sometimes like a storm passing through, but she'd shake it off with a quick laugh. One crisp evening in the late fall, the leaves crunching underfoot and the air smelling like wood smoke from distant chimneys, I was in my kitchen wiping down the counters after a simple dinner of grilled cheese and soup. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows through the windows, and I was thinking about putting on some music when there was a soft knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Deliveries don't come that late. So I wiped my hands on a dish towel and went to answer it. There stood Julia, wrapped in a thick wool scarf, her face pale under the porch light. Her eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying, and she clutched a knitted blanket against her chest as if it were a shield. She looked smaller than usual, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen her before. "Mark, can I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling just a little. I stepped aside without hesitation. "Of course. Everything okay?" She nodded faintly but didn't meet my eyes as she slipped past me into the living room. I closed the door behind her, the chill from outside following us in. "Let me get you something warm. Tea? Coffee?" "Tea would be nice," she said, sinking onto the edge of my couch. Her hands twisted the blanket's fringe and she stared at the floor. I busied myself in the kitchen, boiling water and pulling out a mug. My mind raced. Had something happened? A family emergency? She didn't have much family that I knew of, but maybe an accident or bad news from work. I brought the steaming mug over and handed it to her, sitting in the armchair across from her. "Take your time," I said gently. "I'm here if you want to talk." She cupped the mug, letting the warmth seep into her palms, and took a deep breath. The silence stretched for what felt like minutes, broken only by the tick of the wall clock. Finally, she looked up, her blue eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that caught me off guard. "I'm sorry to bother you like this," she started, her voice steadier now but still laced with emotion. I didn't want to be alone tonight, and there's something I need to ask you. It's going to sound crazy, but please hear me out." I nodded, leaning forward slightly. "Go ahead, Julia, whatever it is." She set the mug down on the coffee table, her fingers trembling. Years ago, I had a family. A husband, David, and our little girl, Emily. She was only 3. We were on our way back from a weekend trip when a drunk driver crossed the median. They didn't make it. I woke up in the hospital alone. My heart sank. I'd suspected something tragic from the way she carried herself, but hearing it laid bare like that. Julia, I'm so sorry, I had no idea. She waved it off, though tears welled up. It's been 5 years. I've tried to move on, therapy, work, keeping busy. But lately the emptiness, it's overwhelming. I miss being a mom more than anything. The sound of laughter in the house, the purpose it gave me. I've thought about adoption, fertility clinics. But it's complicated, expensive, and impersonal. I want a child who's part of me, someone to love and raise. And I trust you, Mark. You're kind, steady. So, would you consider helping me have a baby? The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. I stared at her, my mind reeling. Help her have a baby? As in, be the father? Donate? Or something more? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My face must have shown the shock because she rushed on. I don't mean marriage or anything like that. Just, if you're willing, we could try naturally or through a clinic. No strings if you don't want them. I'd raise the child myself. But I understand if this is too much. I just had to ask someone I know wouldn't judge me. I sat back, my pulse pounding. This was insane, unexpected, intimate, life-altering. Julia, the quiet neighbor I'd helped with odd jobs, was asking me to father her child. Part of me wanted to say no to keep my simple life intact. But another part, deeper, saw the raw pain in her eyes and felt a pull I couldn't ignore. You don't have to answer now, she whispered, standing up. I'm sorry if I freaked you out. Good night, Mark. She left quietly, the door clicking shut behind her. I stayed there, staring at the untouched tea, 1,000 thoughts swirling. What if I said yes? What if I didn't? Across the street, her porch light flickered off, leaving her house dark. And for the first time in years, my own felt emptier than ever. The days after that night blurred into a haze of routine and restlessness. I woke up the next morning with the echo of Julia's words still ringing in my ears like a distant thunder that wouldn't fade. The coffee tasted bitter, the chrysanthemums outside looked wilted under the gray sky, and even the familiar hum of the shop's fluorescent lights felt oppressive. I went through the motions, fixing a leaky dishwasher for Mrs. Harlan down on Elm Street, replacing a faulty thermostat in Mr. Jenkins's old fridge. But my mind kept drifting back to her, to that vulnerable look in her eyes, the way her voice cracked when she mentioned her family. And that question? God, that question. It hung over everything like a shadow I couldn't shake. I avoided glancing across the street when I got home that evening. Her porch light was on, but the windows were dark, curtains drawn. Part of me wanted to knock on her door, to say something, anything, to ease the awkwardness that must be building between us. But what could I say? Hey, about that baby thing. No, it felt too raw, too soon. Instead, I poured myself a beer, sat on the couch, and stared at the TV without really watching. Sleep didn't come easy that night. I tossed and turned, replaying the conversation, questioning if I'd handled it right. Had I seemed judgmental, dismissive, or worse, pitying? By midweek, the weight of it all started to press down harder. At work, I'd zone out mid-repair, nearly dropping a wrench on my foot once. My boss Tom noticed and clapped me on the shoulder. You all right, Sullivan? Look like you got the world on your back. I muttered something about not sleeping well and pushed through. But inside, the questions piled up. Could I really do this? Be a father without the whole package? Marriage? Commitment? The works? I'd never pictured myself as a dad. My own childhood was stable enough, but distant. Parents who worked long hours, leaving me to figure things out alone. And Julia, she wasn't just asking for a favor. This was her life, her healing. What if I messed it up? What if saying yes changed everything and not for the better? That Thursday, I finally broke and called my sister, Martha. She's 35, lives up in Portland with her husband and 2 kids, and she's always been the one I turn to when things get tangled. We don't talk every day, but when we do, it's real. I caught her just after dinner, the sound of her boys laughing in the background. Mark, everything okay? You sound off, she said right away. I paced my living room, spilling it all, the knock at the door, Julia's story, the proposal that came out of nowhere. Martha listened without interrupting, just the occasional mm-hmm to let me know she was there. When I finished, there was a pause, and then she sighed softly. Wow, little brother, that's a lot. First off, I'm sorry for her. Losing a family like that? I can't even imagine. She hesitated. But how do you feel about her? Beyond the shock. I stopped pacing, leaning against the window frame. Outside, a light rain had started, pattering against the glass. I don't know, Martha. I mean, I've always liked her. She's kind, smart. We've talked enough that I feel like I know her, at least a little, but this? It's huge. What if I'm not cut out for it? What if I say yes and regret it? She chuckled gently. Mark, you're the most reliable guy I know. You fix things for a living. Hell, you fixed my marriage that one time by talking sense into Dave when he was being an idiot. If anyone could handle this with grace, it's you. Her voice softened. But listen, if your heart's pulling you toward her, not just the idea of helping, then maybe it's worth exploring. Life's too short to let fear call the shots. Remember when I almost didn't marry Dave because I was scared of messing up like mom and dad did? Best decision I ever ignored my doubts on. Her words stuck with me long after we hung up. I sat there in the dim light, turning them over. Fear, that was it, wasn't it? Fear of change, of stepping into something unknown, but underneath that, there was something else. I'd always noticed Julia in a way I hadn't admitted. The way she laughed at my dumb jokes about faulty wiring, the quiet strength in how she carried on alone. Maybe it wasn't just neighborly concern. Maybe it was more. A few nights later, as the rain turned to a steady drizzle, I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over her number before I typed, "Hey, Julia, if you still want to talk about it, I'm here. No pressure." Her reply came almost immediately. "Thanks, Mark. I was worried I'd scared you off. Just knowing you're not avoiding me means a lot." We didn't dive back into the heavy stuff right away. The next day, she waved from her porch as I pulled into my driveway, and I crossed the street to chat. She handed me a container of homemade soup. "For the cold weather," she said with a small smile. We talked about nothing important. The forecast calling for more rain, a new coffee shop opening downtown. But there was an undercurrent, a shared understanding that we were tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. Over the weekend, she brought over some fresh-baked muffins as a thank you for listening that night. We stood at my front door, the conversation lingering longer than usual. "I meant what I said," she murmured before leaving. "No expectations, but I'm glad you're thinking about it." As she walked back across the street, her porch light flickering on in the twilight, I felt a shift. The fear was still there, but so was something warmer, a quiet pull toward her, toward the possibility of filling the emptiness we'd both been carrying. For the first time, I wondered if saying yes wasn't just about helping her, but about finding something I didn't know I needed too. A few days after our brief exchange at the door, I mustered up the courage to take the next step. I'd spent the weekend mulling over Martha's words, replaying Julia's vulnerability in my mind, and realizing that avoiding her wasn't fair to either of us. So on a rainy Sunday afternoon, I texted her, "Hey, if you're free tonight, want to come over for dinner? I make a mean spaghetti, no pressure to talk about anything heavy, just food and company." Her reply came quickly. "That sounds nice. What time?" 6:30? I'll handle the cooking. See you then. I spent the next few hours prepping, chopping onions, browning ground beef, simmering sauce with fresh basil from the market. It felt good to have a task, something to focus on besides the knot in my stomach. By the time she knocked, the kitchen smelled like garlic and tomatoes, and I'd put on some soft jazz playlist to fill the quiet. Julia arrived with a bottle of red wine and a tentative smile. She wore a simple sweater and jeans, her hair loose around her shoulders. "Smells amazing," she said, handing me the bottle. "Thanks. Come on in. Make yourself comfortable." We moved to the kitchen where I handed her a glass of wine. "Want to help stir the sauce? Or just sit and supervise?" She laughed softly, the first genuine one I'd heard from her in days. I'll stir. I'm not completely useless in the kitchen. As we worked side by side, the tension eased a bit. We talked about easy things first. The rain that had been relentless all week, how it was flooding the low spots in town, the new bakery that opened on Main Street. But as the pasta boiled and we set the table, the conversation deepened naturally. I asked about her childhood, and she opened up about growing up in a small town in Ohio, the kind with endless cornfields and long, quiet winters. My dad was a farmer. Mom stayed home with us kids, she said, twirling her fork in the sauce. I had two brothers, always roughhousing. I used to dream of being an artist, sketching everything from barns to wildflowers. But money was tight, and after high school, I went straight to work. Dreams like that. They fade when reality hits. I nodded, serving us both generous portions. Sounds familiar. My folks divorced when I was 12. Dad moved to California for work. Mom raised me and Martha alone. I picked up fixing things early, started with bikes in the garage, then appliances. It's satisfying, you know? Taking something broken and making it work again gives you a sense of control in a world that doesn't always cooperate. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, the jazz filling the gaps. Then, as we cleared the plates, Julia set down her glass and looked at me steadily. Mark, about the other night, I didn't mean to drop that on you like a bomb, but I appreciate you not running for the hills. I leaned against the counter, drying my hands. It caught me off guard, yeah, but I've been thinking about it a lot. Tell me more if you're okay with it. What happened with your family? She took a deep breath, her fingers tracing the edge of the wine glass. David and I met in college. He was studying engineering. I was in business admin. We got married young, had Emily right after. She was everything. Curly hair like mine, his laugh. We had this little house in Portland, weekends at the coast, picnics in the park. Then, one rainy night, we were driving back from a family dinner. I was behind the wheel, David in the passenger seat, Emily asleep in her car seat. A truck swerved into our lane, head on. I don't remember much after the impact. Woke up in the hospital with broken ribs and a concussion. They were gone. Just like that. Her voice broke and she wiped at her eyes. I blame myself for years. If I'd taken a different route, if I'd driven slower. Therapy helped, but the hole never really fills. And the silence in the house? It's deafening. That's why I asked you. I want to hear laughter again, feel that purpose. But I get it if it's too much. I reached across the table, taking her hand in mine. It was warm, trembling slightly. Julia, you're not at fault. Accidents happen and surviving them doesn't make you guilty. You deserve to live, to love, to be a mom again. If that's what you want, I'm open to it. Not just to help, but because I care about you. She squeezed my hand, tears spilling over. Really? Yeah, really. In that moment, she leaned forward, resting her head on my shoulder. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her, as she let go of the sobs she'd been holding in. It was the first time I'd seen her truly vulnerable, and it cracked something open in me, too. I realized then that this wasn't just about her request. I wanted to be there for her in ways I hadn't fully admitted to myself. Over the next few weeks, we started spending more time together. We'd meet at the park near our houses, walking the trails lined with evergreens, talking about everything and nothing. One afternoon, she opened up about her fears of motherhood again, the what-ifs, the loneliness of doing it alone. I shared my own doubts, never having pictured myself as a dad, worrying I'd repeat my parents' mistakes. We decided to see a doctor together, a fertility specialist in Eugene. The office was quiet, clinical, with pamphlets on IVF and donor options. The doc ran tests, explained processes, and assured us it was feasible. Julia was clear. I don't need a wedding or labels, just a partner I can trust, someone to be a good father if they're willing. I nodded, but inside I was already envisioning more. A real family, not just an arrangement. We left the appointment hand in hand, the rain having cleared to a crisp blue sky. Our evenings turned into routines. Movie nights on my couch, helping her prune the roses in her garden, even repotting some of her lavender that had overgrown. Neighbors started noticing. Mrs. Thompson from next door commented on how nice it was to see us together, and old Mr. Riley across the way gave me a knowing wink one day. No one gossiped. If anything, they seemed happy to see Julia's light returning. She smiled more, laughed easier, and I found myself looking forward to those moments like nothing else. One evening in the park, as we watched kids playing on the swings, the sun dipping low and casting golden hues over everything, I turned to her. "Julia, I think I'm ready for all of it. What you asked and maybe more." She looked at me, her eyes shining, and squeezed my hand tighter. "Me too." A few months after that walk in the park, where we'd held hands and admitted we were ready for whatever came next, Julia called me one afternoon while I was at the shop. Her voice was shaky, excited, different from the usual calm I'd come to expect. "Mark, can you come over after work? There's something I need to tell you in person." My heart skipped. "Everything okay?" "Better than okay, just hurry home." I wrapped up early, my mind racing through possibilities. Was it good news? Bad? By the time I pulled into my driveway, the sun was low, casting long shadows across our quiet street. Julia's porch light was already on, and she met me at her door with a small, nervous smile. She pulled me inside, closing the door behind us, and without a word, handed me a small white stick from the counter. 2 pink lines. I stammered, staring at it, my hands suddenly unsteady. She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Pregnant. I took the test this morning. Doctor confirmed it an hour ago." Joy hit me like a wave, crashing over everything else. I dropped the test and pulled her into a hug, lifting her off the ground slightly as she laughed through her tears. "Julia, this is incredible. We're having a baby." We stood there in her kitchen, holding each other, the world outside fading away. I bought a bouquet of yellow chrysanthemums on the way home that night, her favorites, and surprised her with them over a simple dinner of takeout pizza. We talked for hours about names, nursery ideas, how we'd rearrange her spare room. But as the evening wore on, a quiet undercurrent of doubt crept in for me. Lying awake in bed later, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily, I couldn't shake the questions. Was I ready to be a dad? Could I provide the stability she and the baby deserved? What if I wasn't enough? What if this was all just me playing hero and reality would hit hard? The fears piled up over the next few days. At work, I'd catch myself zoning out, imagining worst-case scenarios, me fumbling as a father, repeating the absentee patterns from my own childhood. Julia noticed my distraction during our evening walks. "You seem quiet," she'd say, squeezing my hand. I'd brush it off with a smile, not wanting to burden her. But inside, I worried. Was I here for the right reasons? Or was this just pity wrapped in good intentions? Julia had her own shadows, too. One evening, about a week after the news, she showed up at my door unannounced, much like that first night. It was drizzling outside, the air cool and damp, and she stood there in a raincoat, her expression a mix of resolve and vulnerability. "Can we talk?" she asked, stepping inside as I took her coat. "Of course, what's on your mind?" We sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where she'd first asked me that life-changing question. She fidgeted with her sleeve, avoiding my eyes at first. "Mark, this pregnancy, it's everything I wanted. But I've been thinking a lot. If this is getting too heavy for you, if you're having second thoughts, please tell me. I don't want you staying out of obligation or pity. You deserve to be free if that's what you need." Her words hit like a punch. I stared at her, stunned. "Pity? Julia, is that what you think this is?" She looked up, tears welling. "I don't know. You've been so good to me, but sometimes I wonder if you're here because you feel sorry for the broken widow across the street. I couldn't bear it if that's the case. I'd rather do this alone than trap you." The room felt smaller, the air thicker. I reached across the table, taking both her hands in mine. They were cold, trembling. "Listen to me," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "I'm not here out of pity or duty. I'm here because of you. Because from the moment you knocked on my door that night, something shifted in me. I've watched you fight through your pain, seen your strength, fallen for your kindness. This baby? It's a gift, but you're the one I want. Not just for now, for everything. I love you, Julia. I have for longer than I've admitted." She froze, her eyes searching mine, as if testing for truth. Then the tears spilled over, and she whispered, You, you love me? Yes, I said, pulling her closer across the table. I love the way you light up when you talk about your garden, the quiet way you care for people without asking for anything back. I love how you've let me in, trusted me with your heart after everything you've lost. And this child? I want to be their dad, but more than that, I want to build a life with you, through the good days and the hard ones. No turning back. She stood then, coming around the table, and I rose to meet her. She buried her face in my chest, her arms wrapping around me tightly as sobs shook her shoulders. I love you too, she murmured against my shirt. I've been so scared to say it, afraid you'd think it was just gratitude. But it's real. You've given me hope again, Mark. A reason to believe in tomorrow. We held each other there in the kitchen, under the warm glow of the overhead light, for what felt like hours. The rain tapped steadily against the windows, but inside, the storm had passed. I kissed the top of her head, promising silently, and then out loud, that I'd never leave, no matter what came. We'll face it all together, I said. You, me, and our little one. She pulled back slightly, looking up at me with a mix of relief and joy. Together, she echoed, her hand resting on her still, flat stomach. We sat on the couch after that, hands intertwined, talking softly about the future, not just the baby, but us. For the first time, it felt solid, real. No more hiding behind fears or what-ifs. As the evening wound down, with her head on my shoulder and the rain easing outside, I knew we'd crossed a threshold. We were in this for keeps. Lily arrived on a crisp spring morning, right as the cherry blossoms were blooming along our street. I'd been at Julia's side through every contraction, holding her hand in that sterile hospital room in Eugene, whispering encouragements as the doctors and nurses bustled around. When our daughter let out her first cry, strong, insistent, full of life, tears streamed down my face. I cut the cord with shaking hands, and the nurse placed her tiny, wriggling body on Julia's chest. Julia looked at her with a mix of awe and exhaustion, stroking her damp hair. She's perfect, she whispered, her voice hoarse but filled with wonder. We named her Lily, after the flowers Julia had always loved tending in her garden, the ones that symbolized renewal and hope. She had Julia's blue eyes and a tuft of dark hair that might turn out like mine. Holding her for the first time, wrapped in a soft pink blanket, I felt a surge of protectiveness I'd never known. This little girl was ours, a bridge between Julia's past and our future. I promised her silently that I'd be the dad she deserved, present, loving, steady. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of sleepless nights and learning curves. I took unpaid leave from the shop, spending my days at Julia's house, changing diapers, warming bottles, and rocking Lily back to sleep when she fussed at 3 a.m. Julia recovered slowly, her body healing from the delivery, but her spirit seemed to mend too. I'd catch her smiling down at Lily during feedings, humming old lullabies she'd once sung to Emily. One afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the curtains, she looked up at me and said, "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm really here. Alive." I moved in officially a month after Lily's birth. It made sense. Why keep bouncing between houses when we were already a family? We turned my place into a part-time workshop for my repairs, but Julia's home became our hub. We rearranged the spare room into a nursery, painting the walls a soft yellow and hanging a mobile of stars above the crib. Lily's cries filled the spaces that had once been silent, her giggles echoing through the halls. The house transformed. Toys scattered on the living room floor, bottles in the sink, a high chair at the kitchen table. And every evening as the sun set, the lights stayed on longer, casting a warm glow that spilled out onto the porch. Julia hung a framed photo in the hallway, a black and white shot of David and Emily smiling on a beach somewhere. Beside it, she added one of us, me holding Lily while Julia leaned against my shoulder, all of us bundled up during our first family walk in the park. "They'll always be part of me," she said one night, tracing the frame with her finger. "But this is our now." Martha came down from Portland every other weekend, bringing onesies and homemade casseroles. She'd scoop up Lily, cooing about how much she looked like me, and tease us about finally making it official. "You two are naturals," she'd say, watching me bounce Lily on my knee while Julia rested. Her visits turned into mini family gatherings, barbecues in the backyard, stories around the dinner table. Even the neighbors got involved. Mrs. Thompson dropped off a quilt she'd sewn, and Mr. Riley shared tips on baby-proofing from his grandkid days. The street felt more connected, like our joy was rippling out. There were tough moments, of course. Lily's colic kept us up for nights on end, and Julia had days when the grief resurfaced, triggered by a milestone Emily never reached or a random memory. One evening, after a particularly rough day, she broke down in the kitchen while washing bottles. "What if I'm not enough for her?" she sobbed. "What if I fail again?" I wrapped my arms around her from behind, resting my chin on her shoulder. "You're more than enough. Look at her. She's thriving because of you. And you're not alone anymore. We're in this together." She turned, burying her face in my chest, and we stood there until her breathing steadied. Those nights reminded me how far we'd come, how love wasn't about erasing pain but holding space for it. As Lily grew, rolling over at 3 months, sitting up at 6, our rhythm solidified. I'd come home from the shop, grease on my hands, and scoop her up for tummy time on the rug. Julia would watch us with that radiant smile, the one that lit up her whole face. We'd take evening strolls to the park, pushing the stroller along paths lined with blooming dogwoods, talking about preschools or weekend getaways to the coast. One quiet night, months later, as Lily slept soundly in her crib, Julia and I sat on the porch swing, a blanket draped over our laps. The air was warm, crickets chirping in the distance, and the streetlights cast a soft glow on the houses around us. She leaned her head on my shoulder, sighing contentedly. "You know," she said softly, "if I hadn't knocked on your door that night, I wonder where we'd be now." I kissed the top of her head, pulling her closer, probably still across the street from each other, living quiet lives, but missing out on this. The best thing that's ever happened to me. She looked up, her eyes shining in the dim light. "Me too. You gave me a second chance, Mark. Not just at being a mom, but at loving again." We sat there swinging gently as the neighborhood settled into night. Across the way, my old house stood dark and empty, but ours, Julia's, now truly ours, glowed warmly from within. Laughter would fill it tomorrow, cries and coos and all the beautiful chaos of family. And in that moment, with her hand in mine and our daughter's peaceful breaths echoing from the baby monitor, I knew we'd built something enduring. A home, a life, a love that had started with a knock on the door and grown into forever.